Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into an absolutely incredible snowballing story. We're looking at a nation that started off as just a collection of isolated colonies and transformed, honestly, in a pretty short span of human history, into a dominant force unlike anything the world had ever seen. We're going to break down exactly how America became a superpower. Okay, let's just jump right into the numbers, because when we talk about absolute global hegemony today, this is exactly what it looks like. The United States maintains roughly 750 overseas military bases across more than 80 countries, and that's backed by an annual defense budget of nearly $1 trillion for 2024. I mean, compare that to the UK, France, Russia, or China. The US presence completely dwarfs every other nation up there combined. But how did we actually get here? To understand this staggering transformation, we're going to trace a chronological snowball effect through 6 pivotal pillars. We've got the geographic advantage, stepping onto global stages, the arsenal and the bank, the Cold War web, the rise of soft power, and finally, the modern superpower dilemma. Let's kick things off with Section 1, the geographic advantage, the dormant foundation of power. $60 trillion. That is the staggering estimated modern economic worth of the land acquired in the 1803 Louisiana Purchase. For just $15 million back then, the U.S. secured a foundation of unparalleled, virtually priceless resources that completely set the stage for everything that followed. That massive land purchase, combined with its existing territory, gave the U.S. something incredibly rare: absolute isolation, beautifully buffered by 2 vast oceans. It gave them the Mississippi River Basin, which, by the way, still handles a whopping 92% of American agricultural exports today. It provided the world's largest coal reserves, plus abundant oil, copper, and gold. And crucially, this geographic isolation meant no foreign wars were fought on the U.S. mainland since 1815. Think about that. America could be entirely self-sustaining while remaining physically untouched by the devastating conflicts that would absolutely consume the rest of the 20th century. Moving right along to Section 2, stepping onto global stages, the era of territorial expansion. Now, notice how rapidly the dominoes start to fall here. Driven by the Industrial Revolution's massive demand for new markets, the U.S. shifted from inward expansion to outward projection. Just look at 1898 alone. They decisively defeated the Spanish Empire, scooping up Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines, and they also annexed Hawaii. Then, by 1903, they locked down control of the Panama Canal Zone, and by 1917, they purchased the U.S. Virgin Islands right as they entered World War I. So boom, just like that, they established a truly global footprint. And honestly, the mindset of the time is brilliantly captured here. President William McKinley said in 1898, "We cannot be unmindful that without any desire or design on our part, the war has brought us new duties and responsibilities." It's a fascinating, accidental to intentional motif, right? Leaders were claiming they had simply stumbled into an empire without any desire or design. Yet, behind the scenes, they were actively taking unprecedented steps to expand their reach. Which brings us to Section 3, the arsenal and the bank, profiting while the world burned. The sheer contrast during the World Wars is staggering, and it fundamentally flipped the global balance of power forever. Look at it. While the major European and Asian powers were literally bombed into ruin, their cities and infrastructure just devastated, the isolated U.S. mainland was completely untouched. America essentially became the safe, undisturbed factory for the entire world. They massively scaled up their industry, transitioning from a net debtor to a massive global creditor. By 1945, the U.S. was producing over 50% of all the goods in the world, while the British pound officially lost its crown to the U.S. dollar. And because they sold all those weapons and supplies to the Allies, first via debt and then through the massive $50 billion Lend-Lease Act, the wealth transfer was just insane. By the end of World War II, the United States ended up holding roughly 65%. That's nearly 2/3 of the entire world's gold reserves sitting in American vaults. So armed with all that gold, America hosted 44 allied nations at Bretton Woods in 1944. And what they did there was intentionally design the modern financial system. They agreed to peg global currencies to the U.S. dollar, which was in turn backed by gold at $35 an ounce. This single agreement, which also birthed the IMF and the World Bank, literally permanently cemented the dollar's dominance worldwide. But they definitely didn't stop at economics. Far from repeating their post-World War I isolationism, the U.S. really leaned in. In 1945, they helped create the United Nations, securing a permanent Security Council seat to enforce global law. And then, through the Marshall Plan in 1948,
They intentionally pumped $13 billion into rebuilding Western Europe. Why? Well, two goals: to secure thriving trading partners to buy American exports, and to create a massive capitalist buffer against the spread of Soviet communist influence. Now for Section 4, the Cold War Web, an empire of military bases. The overarching strategy driving this entire era can really be summed up in one word: containment. To counter the Soviet Union, the United States simply refused to demobilize its massive World War II military machine. Instead, they built this globe-spanning web. They established NATO and began intervening, sometimes in total secret, in places as far-flung as Iran, Afghanistan, and Nicaragua. The goal was to halt communist expansion at absolutely every turn through military alliances and permanent overseas bases.
And you know what's crazy? This military web didn't just vanish when the Cold War ended. Instead, it kind of breathes, expanding and contracting based on new geopolitical flashpoints. You can see it right here. From a peak of over 550 facilities in Central Asia between 2001 and 2014 to the full withdrawal and closure of about 100 facilities in Afghanistan in 2021. And now, we're seeing buildups in Eastern Europe with over 20,000 troops added since 2022 and brand new expansions in the Philippines in 2024. The foundation remains totally intact.
All right, Section 5, the rise of soft power, conquering through culture. Because look, you don't become the ultimate superpower through military bases and financial loans alone. You also have to capture the world's imagination. That brings us to soft power. Coined by political scientist Joseph Nye, it's the ability to attract and co-opt rather than coerce, acting as a powerful substitute for traditional military hard power. And what's absolutely fascinating here is that American soft power wasn't entirely some master government plot. It was largely the completely unintended consequence of brilliant profit-driven capitalism going global. By selling their consumer culture abroad, America essentially conquered hearts and minds. We're talking about the global export of Hollywood films, television, and popular music, the expansion of everyday consumer goods like Coca-Cola into recovering markets. It was the creation of global logistical networks like Pan Am Airlines, and the spread of American-style hospitality through chains like Hilton. By selling this positive, aspirational view of the American dream, the U.S. exported its values right alongside its products, making folks all over the world highly receptive to American leadership, without a single shot being fired. Which brings us to our final section, Section 6, the modern superpower dilemma at a geopolitical crossroads. So here we are in the modern day, maintaining these incredible global systems built back in the 1940s, but it brings us to a deeply divided debate on what actually comes next. Let's impartially look at both sides. On one side, you've got the case for the global network. It provides unmatched deterrence against adversaries, enables rapid logistics and crisis response, like using the Ramstein base to aid Ukraine, and keeps vital trade lanes open while managing complex alliances. But on the other side is the case for restraint. Critics argue the U.S. is uniquely burdened with a $150 billion annual cost to maintain a system built for a Cold War threat, the Soviet Union, that ended 35 years ago. They argue that allies are heavily subsidized for their own regional defense, which just isn't sustainable. Which leaves us right here. I want to leave you with this final, provocative question based on our explainer today. As the world shifts economically and technologically, does today's threat environment still justify a $150 billion global military presence? Is this 20th century blueprint the right foundation for the future? It's a huge question. Thank you so much for exploring this with me, and I'll see you next time.